Well, it's new, it's cool, and it's big. It's really big. It's damn near the size of the flying sub from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you the Manta Ray and a much bigger story than that. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And guys, this is going to take a little bit of a setup because there's a term I heard that I think is going to be something we're going to be hearing a lot more of. And certainly seems to be the way we're heading as a nation in terms of our own defense. We all remember when the Ukraine war started, and I'm sure we did a show. I remember doing a show on the idea that a off-the-shelf drone could fly over a multi-million-dollar tank, drop essentially a grenade down the hatch, and take that tank out. You know, as a multi-million-dollar tank, you take it out with a $200 drone. That changed warfare. And what I've been seeing lately is just much more disturbing, really. But essentially now, the situation in Ukraine is, with the lines stabilized, it has turned into a war where drones are essentially guided hand grenades, where drone attacks will go after individual soldiers and drop 2, sometimes 3 grenades on one person just to kill that soldier. I bring this up because this idea of drones and unmanned vehicles is certainly the way things are going to be going. So Manta Ray, as you saw from the thumbnail there, is an autonomous vehicle, and it's changing the way we look at warfare. The term I was referring to is attritable assets. So let's just talk about that for a second. Steve, let's start with you. The Air Force has something that's very similar to this called the Loyal Wingman program, and the idea will be that advanced jets like the F-22 and the F-35 and the upcoming next generation air dominance fighter, 6th generation fighter, will be manned, but we won't need entire fleets of them because that manned aircraft will go into combat with 6 or 12 or however many other drones that will carry weapons. They'll have a high level of autonomy. Those drones will go in and strike targets while the manned aircraft kind of hangs back and coordinates things. And they use the term attritable assets because the United States gave up on attrition certainly by World War II. We believe that we would rather have higher quality things and bring our people back than just keep throwing people and things into the grinder until we win by attrition. But the idea of attritable assets is interesting, Steve, because some of these so-called loyal wingman drones cost roughly what a decent missile costs. And so we no longer have to worry about a 600 aircraft buy, where we're not buying 600 aircraft at $100 million each. We're buying one aircraft at $100 million, and we're sending it in with 8 aircraft that cost $1 million. And if these drones get shot down going after air defenses, well, it's a balance sheet issue, but it's not the kind of thing that would prevent you from doing the mission the way you would if those were manned assets. This seems to be the future, and it seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, I'll get to all that in just a moment. And yes, it does. But you just made me realize something. Bill, you go back to World War II, which is obviously when the U.S. had given up on the idea of attrition. Because, I mean, we lost way too many men in World War I, most of them to chemical weapons that we were not ready for. Even by the end of the war, we still weren't ready for them. It was just terrible. And we learned our lesson from that. But we may be, you look at the major combatants of World War II, and unless you include all of the British Empire, we had the largest population. We had the most people to lose, and yet we chose the path of spending more and building more instead of spilling more blood. And I believe that's got to be unique in human history. That's
the Cold War in a nutshell. We're gonna develop technologies at a very high cost in order to save lives with better jets and better equipment, and the Soviets would do just
exactly. And by the early 80s, we were training our guys in Europe to not think of themselves as outnumbered, but to fight in a target-rich environment. And that's just a ballsy phrase. You got to love it. In any case, the whole loyal wingman thing. The first time I heard of it, I was amazed. For a couple of reasons. One, the more autonomous the loyal wingman jets become, the more cognitive load you remove from the pilot of the manned plane, and that's very important. Thanks to software in the F-35, that one-man jet, the F-35, is basically an entire AWACS crew, but you've only got one guy.
Yeah, it's a flying supercomputer.
Yeah, you've only got one guy instead of a dozen guys in an AWACS. So they had to write a lot of software code to reduce the load on that pilot's brain so he could manage that information and make decisions. With AI-enabled autonomous little helper friends, you remove even more of that load because they are going to be semi-autonomous. And one of the great things they do is we're working on pretty expensive energy weapons to knock down incoming missiles. I got a missile coming at me. I got to drop chaff or whatever. But in a last-ditch thing, Bill, these loyal wingmen are programmed to suicide themselves in front of one of these missiles instead of the plane taking the hit.
Right.
From top to bottom, it's a brilliant idea, and the best part is this plays into strengths that this country has been building on since the 1940s. China is a tough competitor. They have some of the best engineers in the world, and they have some of the most engineers in the world. That makes them tough. But we have two things going on our side. One is a history of innovation, and another is 80 years of this being our way of doing things. And that's a kind of tradition and culture, I guess, a sort of a business culture that you can't just grow overnight. We've got it, they don't, and this Loyal Wingman program is just more proof of that.
Well, Scott, that's an interesting point about China and Russia as well. You can look at China and say, well, they graduate more engineers than we graduate students in any given year, which is true. But they do not have a culture of innovation. In fact, they have a culture where innovation and individuality, which is the core of innovation, and just striking off on your own and starting up your own business, that behavior is actively, deselected. So let's go back to the Manta Ray. The Manta Ray is a autonomous vehicle, and the idea is instead of us having to build a lot more attack subs, which are very expensive and crewed obviously by 100 men or so. The idea would be that we would build large numbers of these things, and these things swim out along the coast, and then they just sink to the bottom of the ocean, and they just sit there and they wait. And when a submarine passes by, they activate and maybe get behind them in the wake, called the baffles, and they just follow them around. And if it looks like they're going to do something nasty, then they just run into them and blow themselves up. We are at a tremendous critical shortage of ships in the Navy, but the idea of using these so-called attritable assets, for those not familiar with the term, it means stuff that we can afford to lose. I mean, it is a dispensable object. Nobody seems to be able to be doing this kind of level of autonomy because our main geopolitical competitors don't have societies that are open and are amenable to this kind of a revolution in military affairs.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if they have the kind of bureaucrats who were able to come up with phrases like attritable assets. I think that
our Pentagonese is way better than theirs.
It's like
I like Loyal Wingman better myself.
It's there's a really easy way to describe this, but nah.
That's funny. Sorry to interrupt you, but the Loyal Wingman is such a name. It's like the drone is shot down and it goes down into the snow, right? And the human pilot is, I'm going in to save it. I've been flying with this thing forever. It's my Loyal Wingman. I've got to get down there and get him out with a helicopter.
Yeah, I would not be surprised because I've already seen, and I just saw another robot that somebody's marketing allegedly for starting at about $16,000. And in all these bipedal robot demonstrations, inevitably they show somebody kicking the thing. And I'm just like, I don't, that just seems mean to me. Like I'm protective of the robot who I've never even seen except on video. So yeah, I would be afraid that some of our soldiers would go, I got to rescue that drone. I think there was a movie I saw a while back. I believe it was called The Expendables. And I think the ultimate point of the movie, though, was that they weren't. And it was more like a tongue-in-cheek reference. But we don't see people that way. We don't think, okay, we can throw 1,000 men into the breach and plug that hole with their carcasses. We're constantly trying to come up with ways to avoid people being disabled or killed in war. And I think as horrible as war is, that's one of the virtues of the way we conduct ourselves. And now it's not that we've never violated our own conscience in this or done something that we would regret later, but our general trajectory is toward life and maintaining it and sustaining it. And I like this idea that we would minimize the number of troops that go into battle. Now, ideally, for most of us conservatives anyway, as we look at weapons like this, we see this as a discouragement to hostile actors who would oppose us. And that, oddly enough, is because we don't want your kids to die either.
Yeah. And if you're not smart enough to see that, then we're going to have to make sure that it's clear to you that you're not going to get any advantage out of this.
Yeah.
The Civil War was interesting for a number of reasons, but one of the things that was most interesting about the Civil War was that the machine gun made its debut in the Civil War. The submarine made its debut in the Civil War. Aerial reconnaissance made its debut in the Civil War. None of these technologies were anything more than experimental, and they had no real influence on the outcome of the war. I suspect that what we're seeing in Ukraine now is something like that. It is an extremely limited preview of what future warfare is going to look like. Certainly 2 or at least 3 significant-sized ships have been sunk by Ukrainian drones that are essentially nothing more than a guy who's playing with his motorboat out on a lake. They just steer this thing out to this thing, ram it and explode it, and take out entire vessels that have crews of, in many cases, hundreds of guys, if not thousands of guys. So it's interesting to me to look at what the future holds. And just very briefly, we essentially at the moment, as we record this, have 2 significant geopolitical opponents. We have Russia and China. What the Ukraine war has shown us is that the Russian idea has not evolved from the Soviet idea. We will continue to throw men into this grinder and kill as many men as it takes in order to obtain our objectives. China's overall strategy is quite different from that. China's strategy is to go with the technology route, but they steal the technology. Yeah. Now, they've been very good at stealing our technology. Their J-20 Mighty Dragon so-called stealth jet is a direct result of having recovered the F-117 that got shot down in the Balkans and so on. But here's the problem with stealing technology. If your entire strategy is to steal technology, you are always at least one generation behind the people that are actually doing it. And what you find is that just because you can steal the technology doesn't mean you can steal the doctrine, the operational things and so on. American mission planners say that our greatest strength is not our hardware, not even really the training of our people. It's our mission planning. We have got this down to an art. We have so many different assets. So long story just to say that some of the shortfalls in the American defense posture that are obvious to us today seem to be being addressed by the Defense Department. And while our government seems to become ever more dysfunctional, it's not only pleasing to me to see these out-of-the-box responses to external threats, but even more impressive to me is that DARPA and the Pentagon are not only using a bunch of different technologies, they're using multiple suppliers to provide those technologies. So we're getting 12, 15, 20 weapon systems that are in development at any given time, and they will all be integrated and turn out being good at what they're good at. People have said, the future belongs to China. I never bought that argument. I just simply never did. It's not about how many people you have. It's not even about how many engineers you have. It's about what kind of society drives your best people to come up with entirely new ways of doing things. And there's no question that the drone revolution is a revolution in military affairs. Just like the invention of gunpowder and bullets pretty much put an end to knights on horseback. The first people into that arena are usually the ones who are going to win. And what's remarkable about the United States is I think it's unparalleled in history, where the nation or the nation state that was dominant in one phase prior to the revolution in military affairs became dominant in the next phase. Usually, the existing power structure is sticking to their battleships in spite of all of these aircrafts. But we seem to be able to bridge that gap. I think we're dominant in this phase of warfare. I think we're going to be dominant in the next one. And things like this Manta Ray that just sits there and waits for enemy subs to come along is just another indication that this old girl's still got some fight left in her. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Right Angle.